Welcome to the Are We Idiots Show, where we question the status quo on society's important issues while mixing in plenty of laughs along the way. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Weaver and Rich Kroll.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Are We Idiots Show. We are your hosts, as always, Richard B. Kroll and Mark R. Weaver.
You know, it's important to get the middle initials in. We don't use them enough in our society. My wife likes to use her full middle name, Jill.
Especially when she's mad at you. Richard B. Kroll.
Oh, I hear it every day. But, she likes to use her full middle name, Jill Christie Kroll. So, it's almost got a Southern thing to it, like Billy Bob Thornton.
In what context does she use that? Always, or just in like formal announcements when she goes to the debutante ball or something?
Debutante balls when she signs things. She would put Jill Christie Kroll.
Wow, that's impressive.
It is
I have
impressive.
a illegible scribble as a signature.
Yes, you do.
So, Richie, do you have any tip of the day for our loyal and wonderful listeners?
First of all, global warming is real. You remember growing up, Mark, October would be kind of like, we'd feel like it's the beginning of winter. October could even snow, and by the time it got to be January, we were looking forward to spring.
Now, remember, we have listeners from all over the world, Richie. You're making it about Pennsylvania again.
Well, let's make it about the U.S. for today. Now,
the Florida residents, too?
Florida as well. Winter's finally hit us. It's January. We've really had no winter at all. We had 50, 60-degree days. So our winters are now January, February, March, and it can even snow in April. So there's a full 2-month shift in our lives. But that's not the tip of the day. Here's the tip of the day. This is the time of year where a lot of people have started to initiate their New Year's resolutions.
We didn't do a show this year on New Year's resolutions.
We didn't do it.
Do you have any, by the way? Or
they're all the same as every year.
Just roll them into the next one.
Roll them into the next year. So, of course, weight loss, as we get older and our friends and family and peers and coworkers kind of get older, it's tougher to lose weight. Obviously, the body's metabolism slows down, and it seems like if you have one Reese's peanut butter cup, you gain 10 pounds. So a lot of my friends and family, everyone's losing weight, working out, trying to joining a gym, dieting.
And we've learned about the right way to do it is intermittent fasting. You taught us that last year.
We can redo it. It's such a great way. I still do it. It's very helpful.
No, none of this keto diet crap.
None of that stuff. But here's what I'm learning. A few people I know just can't do it. I'll run into them and they're 50 pounds overweight or 100 pounds overweight. They just can't do it. They just can't separate the importance of food from, getting overweight. And I thought about something because I know everybody has the breaking point, like the feather that broke the camel's back with a certain weight that makes you feel bad, right? Whether it's
hit rock bottom.
Well, before you hit rock bottom is when you're 150 pounds overweight and you can't even.
They always say that with like drug addicts or alcoholics. You hit rock bottom that's when you finally decide to like do something about it.
Unfortunately, that could be the case, but I'm talking about that 1 pound that starts to mess up your internal organs or give you stomach aches or heartburn or night sweats or you're snoring at night or your ankles hurt, your knees hurt, your lower back hurts. For me, when I get to, and I've been in range probably from my high school weight or college weight, 20 pounds.
Right.
If I get 20 pounds overweight, I put a stop to it. But I noticed I don't feel right. I don't sleep right. My lower back hurts.
Right.
So I have something to say to all you people. Would you rather live in pain or hunger? My tip of the day is think about it that way. If you're hungry and you don't need to eat another box of Twinkies or another box of Cheez-Its and drink a half gallon of soda, would you rather satisfy your hunger or satisfy your internal pain that you're in?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Usually you provide very good tips, Richie, but I'm a big believer that unless someone is really motivated, they're not going to do it. And it really comes down to what's important to them. And so, I don't know. I just think that the people that And I'm sure there are some people with thyroid conditions or what have you that are certainly exceptions. But generally speaking, it just doesn't mean that much to them because if it really meant something to them, they would do what they have to do, whether that's exercise or dieting or whatever.
Do you think pain avoidance is a pretty good motivator?
I don't think they have that much pain to make them to do it. I think, if they had enough pain and they could draw a direct correlation to overeating or their excessive weight, they probably would do something to it to avoid the pain, but they'd rather take a pill.
Well,
That'd be my
I'm
bet.
just giving people a different way to think about things if they're in pain.
Right.
That, hey, if you're in pain, I'd rather be a little bit hungry and not in pain than in pain and not hungry. So that's my tip.
Okay.
Think about it.
You're about 90% on your tips, but that one I'm not so sure about.
Well, you're not overweight, so
I've probably been in a range of maybe 10 pounds in 30 years. Maybe that's like the outer range. So I've been fortunate that I just don't eat a lot, and I try to not eat too much, and I try to stay a little bit active. But
and it is easier to maintain a slight build.
extremely slight. All right, Richie. So we're going to go. Our agenda today is Idiot of the Week. I'm going to have some nominees for you here. One of which was submitted by one of our patrons, Eric. And then we're going to talk about the Electoral College. Rich, you've been waiting for so long about the Electoral College. I know there's a plethora of our listeners out there that really want to understand the Electoral College. We're going to help them today.
Months and months I've been chomping at the bit for this episode.
And then we're going to highlight some election shockers from history that you may or may not be aware of. One of them a few of them you're actually aware of, but we'll talk about it in a little more detail. So that's what we got on the agenda. Sound good, Richie?
Sounds great, Mark.
All right, so here's Idiot of the Week nominee number 1. 6 tourists were busted in Peru for allegedly defecating in a sacred temple at Machu Picchu. The group was arrested Sunday after park rangers and police found them inside the Temple of the Sun, which is off limits to visitors. The 6 tourists are being detained and investigated by the public ministry for which the alleged crimes against cultural heritage, Cusco Regional Police Chief William Leiva said. Leiva said there was a fracture found on a piece of stone that was broken off the wall, which also caused a crack in the floor. Authorities also discovered feces inside the temple. The group included 2 Brazilians, 2 Argentinians, 1 French tourist, French,
Well, that explains it there.
and another person from Chile. They face up to 4 years in prison if found guilty of vandalizing the heritage site. So that's nominee number 1.
Well, how do 6 people have to take a crap at the same time in a temple?
I think they obviously were planning it. And, those French people, we don't want to
They'll
insult.
go anywhere.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
They have no couth. All right, this is the better one, I think. I want to prejudge your verdict, but this was submitted by Eric Weaver, one of our patrons, and, of course, musical contributor to the show. A woman in the UK was secretly gorging on baby powder for 10 years before her ex-partner discovered the bizarre habit, which she now is seeking professional assistance for. You think?
I would hope so.
Lisa Anderson, who said she was depressed and had anxiety, has also been told she's likely suffering from pica, not the pizza in this area.
I suffer from not having Pica's pizza often.
I just had one the other day, by the way. Pica I've never even heard of this. Pica is an eating disorder that involves eating items not typically considered food and that have no nutritional value.
Like when I eat Legos?
They would be under
that would
pica.
classify?
Symptoms include persistent eating of these types of substances, which can include, you ready?
Yeah.
Dirt, hair, metal, pebbles,
Are we talking about cats or humans?
ash, clay, and others. Risk factors include other mental health disorders,
Oh, I could see that.
such as schizophrenia and autism, as well as an iron deficiency anemia and malnutrition. Anderson says she spends around $13 a week keeping up her habit, which revolves around Johnson's baby powder.
This is as
I'm not
bizarre
sure
as it gets.
I'm not sure I can get through the rest of this without busting out laughing. I've always had it in the house and would douse myself with it after having a bath or shower, she told British news agency SWNS. I'd use it on the kids after giving them a wash, no problem. And then one day, I remember being in the bathroom, and the smell was just overpowering. There was a bit of dust that had come off the top of the bottle, and I had this sudden urge to eat it. I just couldn't fight it. I just licked it off my hand and really enjoyed it. It just hit the spot.
What?
Oh, man. She says she can't go 30 minutes without it. If she's in public, she chews on a mint to just wait until she gets home. The longest she's ever gone without baby powder is 2 days, and she said it was the worst time of her life. And she's trying to seek a formal diagnosis with a therapist, but she just wanted to speak out because she wanted people if other people had this, to not feel alone.
I've been alive for several decades, and I've never heard this where you would even think there's other people that have a pica problem.
Well, pica is very wide. You can eat dirt and metals and pebbles, but baby powder. Yeah, pica has all these. Dirt, hair, metals. It could be anything of that could be pica.
I'm confused on multiple levels because when I had an iron deficiency, I actually started eating clay to the red clay that has the iron in it. Okay.
So this should be an easy declaration of verdict, I think, but maybe not.
Well, when I think, and I don't want to be so callous. I remember there was a period in my life when I had hair and I was using Head and Shoulders, and I admit I was guzzling the other half of the bottle of Head and Shoulders, and it took me a while to get over that. Yeah, hands down. Well, here's the thing: 6 people. What were they? Just at a Mexican restaurant and had a bad burrito? Like, how do you all have to go the number 2 at the same time and then think of there has to be
ultimate losers.
It's bizarre. But this poor woman, I mean, I feel bad for her, but you have to know eating 20 pounds of talcum powder every day it can't be good for you.
First of all, Johnson & Johnson's getting sued all the time for ovarian cancer for Johnson's baby powder because of the talc, or supposedly, but who knows? But ingesting it, I mean, that's the surest way to cancer in your whole life.
Can she sue J&J for what it's doing to her?
I wouldn't surprise me there'll be a lawyer out there that would take the case. So, hands down, Richie, Laurie Johnson from the UK she's a strong contender for Idiot of the Year.
Can you send her $13 just to
give her 1 month's supply?
1 month supply? Wow.
That is awful.
Awful.
All right, Richie. So we're going to talk about at the risk of potentially bringing up a subject that maybe not everyone is ultimately concerned about. We're going to talk about the Electoral College. And I think, Rich, I would say, very humbly, I would say that in the realm of political economy, I'm fairly well informed. I read a lot. I probably listen to 10 or 12 hours a week of podcasts in the political economic realm. I'm reading constantly about this stuff. And usually, as you know, and you accuse me of it frequently, that I have pretty strong opinions once I come to some conclusion. With the Electoral College, I'm very torn. There's very good arguments on both sides. So this is one of those cases where I may need your help to help me settle on one side on the political realm.
This is unusual, folks.
Yeah, because you basically know nothing about all this stuff. So I have to help you through this. But truthfully, there's good arguments on both sides of this, and I'm not really sure where I stand it'll become clear. So anyhow, I think you and I have talked on this show that the electorate is largely ignorant and apathetic. They don't know and they don't care. Right? And so, some of this stuff is probably representative of where we are politically in the world today. So let's start with what is the Electoral College and how did it come about? So the Electoral College was I'm a big fan of the founders, which is one of the reasons in the Constitution, one of the reasons I'm drawn to one side of the Electoral College argument. And why did they do this? Well, back when they were in the Continental Congress and all that and trying to form the Constitution, there was a big argument. And these were all elitists. And one group wanted the Congress to elect the president. And another group wanted a direct election of all the people. And they couldn't agree and it was many months, the Continental Congress, and they settled on this compromise. And the compromise is essentially where each state will have a slate of electors. And the way it works is the Republicans let's just take Pennsylvania, since that's where we're based. Republicans will have a proposed slate of electors, and the Democrats will have a proposed slate of electors. And so if hypothetically Trump wins the Pennsylvania state, if the totality of the vote is more Republican than Democrat, then those Republican slate of electors are the representative electors to vote at the Electoral College. And the Electoral College votes on this, I didn't know the exact date, but it's where is it? It's the second, it's the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December after the election.
That's easy to follow.
Yeah, so the first Monday after the second Wednesday, that's when the Electoral College votes. Obviously, the elections are the first Tuesday in November. So before I go any further, what do you think about the reasoning behind it? And by the way, just to add this before you go off, the reason they didn't trust the people to do it is because they didn't think the people were smart enough. I mean, I'm using harsh language.
They were right about that.
Alexander Hamilton really was the leader behind it, but he just said, like, hey, these people aren't informed. They can't be trusted to do this. And some would say that today there's plenty of ways to be informed, but you could still argue that the voters aren't very well informed. So
it's not even an argument. 273 years later.
Eventually, if we do this show long enough, you'll be the right number.
273, eventually. They're still not informed. If you think about the average person, how they vote, right? They watch some news. They watch some debates. They read the newspaper. They shake the hands of somebody that, and it's very infrequent now, that happens to stop by their door, knock on the door.
They get a Facebook ad.
Or that I'm a Republican. I registered Republican 30
I just voted
years
for
ago.
them.
Yeah, I registered to be a Democrat 25 years ago, and they just go in and they vote Republican. They don't even understand or know any of the platforms or programs or what each candidate represents. I know so many people in my friends group. I'm a Republican. I just pull the lever for all Republican. I'm a Democrat. I try to look at each individual and see what they bring to the table.
And maybe even find a libertarian in there.
You know what? I'm not opposed. So I agree. I still think not everyone, but the majority of the American public is still not informed on who to vote for. They just vote.
So what I thought might be a good way to go about this, Rich, I have three different pros and cons. So I have one pro, one con about the Electoral College, and this will give you an opportunity to, judge which one you think has a more valid argument, and then we can move on to the second one. So pro number one, the Founding Fathers enshrined the Electoral College because in the U.S. Constitution because they thought it was the best method to choose the president. Using electors instead of the popular vote was intended to safeguard against uninformed or uneducated voters, like we just talked about. It also prevents states with larger populations from having undue influence, which was the big thing that I think is important. And the compromise between electing the president by popular vote and letting the Congress choose the president. It references Alexander Hamilton in here and what have you. This is one of his quotes. Not perfect, or at least excellent, because it ensures that the office of the president will never fall to the lot of any man who is not in an eminent degree endowed with his requisite qualifications. The founders wanted to balance the will of the populace against the tyranny of the majority, in which the voices of the masses can drown out minority groups. Okay, so that's pro. Here's the con. The reasons for which the Founding Fathers created the Electoral College are no longer relevant. Modern technology allows voters to get necessary information to make informed decisions in a way that could not have been foreseen by the Founding Fathers. Also, Alexander Hamilton saw the electors as being free from any sinister bias, which we know is not true. These supposedly smart people, they all have bias. So that's a true statement as well. Members of the Electoral College are now selected by the political parties in each state, which are largely political insiders. And they're required, in many times by pledge, not by law, to vote according to the way that the state votes. As a result of constitutional amendments, women and former slaves have the right to vote, and senators, once appointed by those state legislatures, are now freely elected by popular vote. The vice presidency was once awarded to the runner-up of electoral votes, but the procedure has changed over time to reflect the reality of elections. So, pro, con there, Richie. Which one of those comes out to you, or do you want to go through all the pros and cons?
I'll just stop there. I'll rattle. Okay. So, this is very confusing and almost contradictory and in conflict. On the one hand, saying that somebody who's in the know, in the political world already, and also an elitist, will choose better than the common man. That's a false claim, as you just said, I believe, because you could be the smartest guy in the world with a PhD in political science. If you're a staunch Republican, you're not being biased, right? So there's a lot of bias in this based on political party and political affiliation.
And let's face it, people will vote their own interests. Yeah, they're going to vote their selfish interests.
Yeah. And I disagree with the statement that, I could see how people were more ignorant. They didn't have access to newspapers. Maybe they couldn't read. They obviously didn't have the internet and social media and all that back then. But even today, 273 years later, they're still ignorant and they have access to all that stuff. People,
right.
Maybe as an entire population, we're a little more informed. But we can also be misinformed, right? There's a lot of fake news out there.
Exactly. That was going to be one of my points is, there's actually a lot of information to decipher through now, which we talked about in the fake news show.
Yeah, so I know I have friends that are personally influenced by whatever TV station or newspaper they believe's real, and then they're influenced by the opinions and, quote, facts that come out of that. So
some people even believe China is paying these tariffs.
Some people do. Now, on the other hand, though, I do agree with, hey, look, why should I don't want a bunch of hippies from California creating decisions for me on the East Coast just because there's more of them that voted and they have more electoral votes.
That's the next pro.
Okay.
We'll go into that.
Okay.
So the Electoral College ensures that all parts of the country are involved in selecting the President of the United States. If the election depended solely on the popular vote, exactly what you're saying, then candidates could limit campaigning to heavily populated areas or specific regions. To win the election, presidential candidates need electoral votes from multiple regions, and therefore they build campaign platforms with national focus, meaning that the winner will actually be serving the needs of the entire country. Without the Electoral College, groups such as Iowa farmers and Ohio factory workers might be ignored in favor of pandering to metropolitan areas with high population densities, leaving rural areas and small towns marginalized. Now, here's the con to that. The Electoral College gives too much power to swing states, which allows the presidential election to be decided by a handful of states. The two main political parties can count on winning the electoral votes in certain states, such as California for Democratic parties and Indiana for Republican parties, without worrying about the actual popular vote totals. Because of the Electoral College, presidential candidates only need to pay attention to a limited number of swing states. And we saw this in the last election where Trump pulled off this straight flush of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, et cetera, and won the election. So my comment before I turn to review is that con is a little bit misleading because as we'll talk about later in the show, the swing states, so to speak, and the electoral map frequently changes. Not necessarily election to election, but in our lifetime, 1980, California voted Republican and for many elections. And now everyone assumes California is so far down the Democratic that Republicans don't even need to go there. But things do change. They're talking about Texas in a couple of elections may be in play for Democrats. So I definitely come down on the side of the pro here, but what do you think?
I come down on the side of the pro because if you break down the population, let's say we have roughly 350 million Americans. Right. There's obviously a combination of children and people that aren't old enough to vote, and then there's a lot of people that just don't vote at all. So let's say, I don't know, 75 million people vote, just hypothetically.
Yeah.
If 50 million of those people come from New York, Texas, California, and Florida,
Right.
then, yeah, 4 states can basically determine the presidential
Right.
winner. So
And they've largely been the population centers for 75 years or something. Not Florida necessarily, but certainly L.A., New York, Chicago. I mean, they've been the largest cities for how long? Our whole lifetime, right?
So I agree with that. There is a bias based on the skewed population.
Right.
A thought's going through my head. Maybe we should have one electoral person from each state, right? There's 50 states, 50.
Right.
I mean, why is Delaware any more or less important than?
Well, that's definitely one. I didn't get to that yet, but so we have 538 electors, and the reason that is because 535 is the total number of House and Senate senators, but then the District of Columbia gets 3 electoral votes, which they don't have any senators or House people. So that's how we get 538, and that's obviously at the census it gets reapportioned or what have you. But there is a talk of just having it. One of the proposals for the Electoral College changing is just having it align with the House representatives, so it changes every 2 years. I don't know if that's right. Here's the third con, and then we'll kind of go on. Electoral College guarantees certainty, and this is a real practical application of the Electoral College. The Electoral College guarantees certainty of the outcome of the presidential election. If elections were based on a popular vote, the candidate to receive the highest number of popular votes without actually obtaining a majority. This happened with President Nixon and President Clinton in 1992, when both men won the most electoral votes while receiving just 43% of the popular vote. The existence of the Electoral College precludes calls for recounts or demands for runoff elections. Can you imagine that? If they had to recount the whole country?
Insanity.
Popular vote. Yeah, it just couldn't be done. I mean, it would take a year probably. The electoral process can also create a larger mandate to give the president more credibility. For example, President Obama received 51% of the popular vote in 2012, but 61% of the electoral votes. And we saw this last election with Trump, right? He won the electoral vote large, but he actually lost the popular vote. But it gave him more of a mandate because he could say he won the electoral vote. The con on this is the Electoral College ignores the will of the people. There are over 350 million people in the United States, or 330 million people in the United States, and just 535 people decide who will be president. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, yet still lost the election. Even President-elect Donald Trump, who benefited from the system, stated after the 2016 election that he believes the president should be chosen by popular vote. I would rather see it where you went with simple votes. You get 100 million votes and someone else gets 90 million votes and you win. Just as in 2000 when George Bush received fewer nationwide popular votes than Al Gore, et cetera, et cetera. So where do you come down on that more practical application of the elections?
It's a flip of a coin. I'd like to go and see factual evidence that there's a problem. So in all the elections we've ever had,
5.
how many has the popular vote different from the Electoral College?
5. 1824, 1876, 1888. So not only 2 in the last 120 years or 140 years, and they were since 2000. Gore versus Bush, which the Supreme Court decided, and then last election, Clinton and Trump.
So if it's only 2 in the last 140 years, I don't see a problem with it, unless they seem to be 3 were clumped in the late 1800s and 2 have been clumped in the last 15 years.
That might be telling us something, huh?
If this becomes now the norm, we are truly a divided country. And then if it's not going to align, like if every single election it doesn't align the popular vote with the Electoral College or vice versa, then there is absolutely a problem.
So what do you think about the fact that, the political parties in each state basically pick the insiders to do it? I mean, is that fair, or should that be a randomized thing? Or I don't know. It seems very swarmy. Yeah, just kind of sleazy. But I guess that's the system we have. We have a federalism system where states get to pick it, and I guess that's an argument for it, because instead of one national election, you really have 51 local elections, right?
Yeah, there's a swarmy angle to this, but what's the alternative?
Politics is swarmy, right?
In general. So, yeah, I mean, okay, but what would be the possible solution? How would you, instead of that group,
Right.
I don't know.
Well, that might bring us to our next phase of this, which is there's been 700, in 200 years, there's been 700 proposals to Congress to amend the Electoral College.
many?
700.
700.
Yeah, that's the most, more than any other subject by far, is people, this has been a continual issue for almost our whole history, which maybe explains why I don't know where I stand on this issue. But one idea would be proportional representation. And this gets into my biggest problem with the Electoral College, Richie. And shockingly, it comes back to my belief that there should be a better third-party option, hopefully libertarianism someday. But what a proportional representation would mean is that if, hypothetically, libertarians, I just pulled that one out of them. It
Yeah, you
doesn't
just pulled
mean
that
I have
out.
any alliance to them. But hypothetically, if 10% of the population voted for a libertarian, then they would get 10% of the seats in Congress, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, a lot of countries around the world have these types of governments, and mostly in Europe, where they have factions, and so there's not two-party system like we have. They have multiple parties, and parties have to get together and form factions in order to pass laws. So that would be the closest alternative to our Electoral College that I think might facilitate a rise of a third party or multiple parties. But unfortunately, this Electoral College system, where you have to get 270 electoral votes to win, it really props up a two-party system and creates this binary choice, which is obviously my big problem with this and why I'm so torn on this issue. So what do you think about that aspect of it?
Well, until there's a valid third party, it doesn't matter, right? We have a binary system, always have, and it seems like it's going to be that way for a while. So, but I agree, if it's thwarting the ability, I'm all for a third party. I think we've gotten so polar opposed and drastically, Civil War mentality with the Republicans so far right and the Democrats so far left. I think the time is right for a third party. But until somebody steps up, like the Libertarians or whoever, to make that happen, it kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah, and just to point out the difficulty of the task of a third party. So the way the Constitution is written is if you don't get the 270 electoral votes, the House chooses the president and the Senate chooses the vice president. So that has actually happened. I have it in my notes somewhere. It happened at some point in the past. I may have to look for that. But it actually happened once for the vice president, where the Senate chose it because I guess the vice president, who was from Kentucky or something like that, didn't get enough electoral votes, so the Senate had to choose it. And it happened twice for president in the 1800s, where the House had to choose the president. So, what's the chances that a libertarian, hypothetically, any third party, is going to get enough votes to force someone the major parties to not get 270 electoral votes, and once that happens, have the votes in Congress to get elected? I mean, it's such a long shot, and I realize that I'm a total outlier here.
But at that point, they'd have to change the numbers, right? Because if you have a valid third party that impacts the 270 from just a mathematical standpoint.
But that requires a change in the Constitution. And to change the Constitution requires a 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of the states. To amend the Constitution, it's a huge hurdle to get over. So I don't know. I mean, I when I got into this a little bit more and understood more of the minutia, I was depressed about the prospects of a libertarian president in my lifetime.
Well, yes, I don't think you'll see it, even close. But that goes back to, as great as the Constitution is, right? It may be the greatest government document ever put together by a bunch of geniuses. It was still written 273 years ago to apply to that time. They weren't writing the Constitution thinking about how, we could have driverless cars in the future.
No, but they did do it to extremely limit the power of government and the avoidance of centralized power and the checks and balances. And the whole way they set it up was genius to limit that. And they did anticipate that humans would not handle power well. And that still holds true, even though I'm on the, my libertarian third party aspirations are going to be sacrificed at this. I do think the Constitution was and is still brilliant and relevant.
Well, I actually said that, but the point is, you even said to open the show that this all started over an argument,
Yeah,
and a compromise,
yeah.
and here we are carrying it, centuries later. Maybe this really does need to be amended.
Yeah, and they have, obviously the Constitution has amendments, and we've done it 26, 27. How many amendments do we have there? I forget, but 20 sometimes. But it takes a huge
Act of Congress.
It takes an act of Congress and the states, and it has to be a plurality of people that really want it in the electorate. So, Richie, let's move on to the last phase of this, which is obviously Trump. We just talked about it. Trump had an electoral college strategy to beat Hillary Clinton, and it worked. So those states, we already mentioned them, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida. What do you think about, and we talked about this in the Trump show a little bit, what do you think about this upcoming election? We're 8 months away now, and we don't even know who Trump's opponent will be. We'll have a pre-election show later this spring, I guess, when we know who the Democratic nominee is. But what do you think about the Electoral College as we go forward? Do you think it's going to be the same states? You think Florida is still in play? What do you think about that?
It's probably going to be similar. I mean, if there was ever an opportunity to displace an existing president, it would be now. Again, I'm not anti-Trump. I'm definitely not, a Trump lover, but he's vulnerable, with everything he's said and done and the way he's acted and his Twitter, a really solid Democratic candidate would probably be elected, but they're not putting up a good candidate. In fact, they're doing themselves, and we've covered this, a huge disservice by going down this rat hole. $400 million spent so far with the impeachment proceedings, and it's infuriating anybody on the right, and it's even starting to infuriate a lot of the left who want to see, hey, can we spend the time, energy, and effort and money towards programs that we need, schools, infrastructure, roads, whatever. So it's probably going to, if he keeps the same strategy, it's probably going to work. And then the question becomes, well, is that fair if you can kind of work a strategy? Yeah,
well, they all do it.
We all do it.
Yeah, they all do it. So my actually, since we had the Trump show with Raph, Bloomberg got in the race from the Democratic side, and he's spending. I think he's already spent $100 million. He's pledged to spend $1 billion, whether he's the nominee or not, advertising against Trump. So my thesis still holds, which I said back on that show with Raph, is that I do think Trump's, obviously he's an incumbent. The economy is still doing okay. And that's really hard to unseat an incumbent. But I still believe that there's enough hatred out there of him that if the Democrats put up quote, I'll call it a moderate. So that at the time we talked about Biden and Buttigieg, and now with Blumenthal in, maybe he would certainly be a moderate too. That I think they'll squeak out a victory. It won't be easy. If they put up Sanders or Warren, I do think Trump will get reelected, and I think he'll be able to scare people on socialism, and rightfully so. So,
yeah, and I don't know that anybody can come into the seventh inning here like a Bloomberg and just buy his way.
He's already fourth, though. I mean, he's already fourth in the national polls now.
Yeah, so
as we tape this.
So he's doing things to get people to, recognize him and maybe like him, but who the heck is he, and what does he know about being a president?
Well, he ran New York City, which has a higher GDP than most states. He obviously has built a successful business. He's 20 times richer than Trump, and Trump used to, brag about how rich he was and how successful he was. So that's why he was qualified to be president. So if by that measure, Bloomberg should be 20 times the president. So again, he's late to the game. I'm not saying he's going to win, but if your thesis is that people are stupid and they just look at ads and make their decision, maybe his ads will work. He's flooding the airwaves.
No one's ever spent $1 billion, so that's going to win some votes.
Of his own money. He's not taking any money either, so that's interesting. All right, so I agree with you that it'll probably come down to the same states: Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, North Carolina might be in play. Florida, they're saying, might be going to Trump, so we'll see. Texas, I think Texas is still a couple of elections off before Austin takes over Texas and it becomes a Democratic state. I think that'll be a while. So any final comments on this subject, Richie, Electoral College, before we talk about election surprises?
As always, Mark, your encyclopedic knowledge of things nobody really cares about is impressive. You should go on Jeopardy. I told you before the show started, I believe 4 out of 5 Americans don't even understand the Electoral College, nor should they. From a standpoint of it's still very confusing. We just explained it, and it's still confusing. So
I don't think it'll change.
It's not changing.
The small states will never vote to give up their power to go to a direct democracy because they'll lose a lot of their power. So, all right, Richie. So we're going to close the show with election surprises. And there's a common saying that election has consequences. In some of these that I'll highlight, there's a lot more to this in history, but these are some of the more popular ones. And you can feel free to editorialize.
Are you going in chronological order?
No, I put them in kind of, in my own kind of this small sample, historical significance. In 1932, Germany's presidential election came down to 2 individuals, the incumbent President Paul von Hindenburg, I'd like to have that name, and the up-and-coming Adolf Hitler. What most people don't know is that Hitler actually lost the election, only taking about 35% of the vote. So how did he turn around and become the chancellor? Well, at that point, Germany's government was in disarray, and they couldn't figure out how to unite as one powerful entity. Hitler's supporters convinced Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as a leader of a coalition government independent from parliamentary parties, and the president obliged. So even though Hitler surprisingly lost the election of 1932, he then went on to become one of the most evil leaders in the history of the world. What do you think about that? He wasn't even elected. He only got 35% of the vote. And
I may nominate Hindenburg as Idiot of the Week posthumously.
He might be Idiot of the Century.
Of the forever.
The Jews certainly would nominate him.
Holy cow.
I wonder if was his company the one that made the Hindenburg?
It's some connection.
It's got to be. All right, next one. This one totally shocked me. I knew that this happened, but I didn't realize it happened so quickly. Anyone would agree that Winston Churchill will go down as one of the most famous men in the history of all of history. The British Prime Minister was a huge factor in helping Great Britain get through World War II successfully. And Churchill was adored for his quick wit and brilliant political mind. He inspired courage throughout the entire nation. Even though he successfully led the nation through the horrible World War II, Clement Attlee won the election of 1945, the year the war ended.
That's amazing.
With a sweeping victory. Churchill's party was surprised and shocked to discover that the people voted for Attlee in spite of admiring Churchill as a hero. The election shook up the status quo of Great Britain and pushed the nation in a new direction. Did you know it happened that same year as the war ended?
I did not.
That is crazy. I mean, I thought he was like, a
hero.
Yeah.
Like who could have ran lifetime nominee.
Exactly.
All right, so I'm going to put a question out there. One of my good buddies, Rick Linares from Long Island, he's finally started listening to the show.
Oh, my goodness.
And he's a huge Churchill fan. He's always sending me stuff about Churchill and watch the movie about Churchill, read this book about Churchill. Rick, did you know that fact?
He must have known it. He's a Churchillite. All right, Richie, number 3. With likely the most surprising votes in the U.S. presidential history, in 2000, a divided Supreme Court ruled that the state of Florida's court-ordered manual recount of votes, the hanging chads, remember that? In Bush versus Gore presidential election was unconstitutional. It ended one of the most baffling political situations in the nation's history. By voting that the manual recount was unconstitutional, the Supreme Court helped Bush clinch the presidency. If they had voted the other way, it was very likely that Gore would have won the state of Florida and become president. Of course, we already mentioned Gore had won the popular vote. So any thoughts on that before we move on to number 4?
It's one of the most bizarre
We lived through it.
situations in political history. How do we know if any of it was done right? It seems very coerced. And I don't think most people realize how they even came up with that name. One of the final votes, right before they were closing the polls, a guy named Chad ran into the gym and he started doing pull-ups. And he shouted, "Pull the lever for me." And they said, "We can't. You're a hanging Chad." And it's very controversial.
That was very good.
Most people don't know that story.
That was very good. And you know what? I was thinking about this when I was putting this together. Some people complain that 538 people elect the president. In this case, one person did. It was a 5-4 Supreme
Right.
Court vote. So one Supreme Court justice decided the election.
It's very hokey.
Number 4, the novelty. You'll love this one, Richie. The novelty candidate isn't supposed to win. They're supposed to be in the race for a little while, drum up some headlines, and drop out to concede the spotlight to a more worthy political candidate. One of the most significant instances of this was the election of Minnesota Governor Jesse the Body Ventura, who took on well-known Norm Coleman, a Republican, Skip Humphrey, a Democrat. Ventura ran as an independent. This is inspiring. And even though everything was against him, he won with 37% of the vote. I mean, that was one of the craziest things. Everyone thought it was just a goof political stunt, and he ends up being the governor of Minnesota.
A guy who probably can't spell his last name. By the way, and I love the name Jesse the Body, right? The body implies head to toe. Jesse Ventura only did upper body. He was huge. Shoulders, chest,
he had
arms.
legs like me.
He had legs maybe skinnier than yours, so he used to wear sweatpants to hide them and boots. And he's Jesse the Body. One of the greatest stupid stories in political history.
All right, 2 more quick ones. According to the polls, Harry S. Truman was lagging significantly behind his opponent, Thomas Dewey. As election night went on, it became more clear and clear that Dewey was going to win the election, with the Chicago Tribune even publishing the now infamous Dewey defeats Truman article. But then things turned around that night. Against all odds, Truman upended the entire political landscape when he snatched the victory away from Dewey in the final hours. Yeah, that's a very famous Chicago Tribune, Dewey defeats Truman. Any comments on that before we go to the last one?
Well, that quickly reminds me, I just watched The Irishman, and there's a scene.
Spent 4 hours.
It's a 4-hour movie. There's a scene where they show in their maybe accurate for all we know, or maybe it's twisted history, how the Kennedys in bed with the mafia.
Yeah, Sam Giancana.
And the mafia got the million union workers and everybody to go vote for Kennedy because of the benefits they get after. So who knows how some of the coercion takes place behind the scenes with elections.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe what did Truman do in the last couple of hours to unexpectedly surpass Dewey in that situation?
Now the bribes are much more out in the open.
Right.
People are just giving right to the candidates and their PACs. All right, last one. United States of America shocked the world. I made this one last because it's more relevant to our current times. Shocked the world by electing Donald Trump in 2016. Trump was seen as winning by focusing on the electoral map strategy, where he ran the table in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Florida, as we've already discussed, with a message of economic nationalism to working class voters who had been disenfranchised by the political elites of both parties. Trump won the election despite weeks of polling predicting Hillary Clinton an easy victory. And also, Trump overcame numerous seemingly disqualifying statements and scandals. Trump had said that Mexico was sending rapists. He mocked a reporter's physical disabilities. He claimed global warming. You referenced it earlier. He claimed global warming was a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese. Criticized war hero John McCain for being captured. Heard on tape suggesting he could grab women by the private parts, plus more than a dozen other women accusing him of sexual assault. Yet he still beat Hillary Clinton. So I know you've said it many times, Rich. I mean, it really was shocking that Trump won because, I mean, Hillary had to be a historically bad candidate to lose to someone. Just those 5 or 6 things that I listed, all true.
She was historically bad.
I mean,
she had
every
her
one
own
of the,
list
every one of
scandals.
those would have been disqualifying, but somehow Trump is like Teflon Don.
I mean, he picked the right year. Hillary has such, a laundry list of between her and Bill and their businesses and Whitewater and all that
the
stuff.
Clinton Foundation was accepting
brutal.
hundreds of millions. Yeah.
But you know what also reminds me real quick? Many, many shows ago, we talked about something similar. And there was I think the state representative in Nevada who was
a libertarian,
a deceased brothel owner.
Yes.
And he won the
anyhow.
election.
He won anyhow, yeah.
And they
now,
even had
in fairness,
signs,
he only died a couple days before the election.
but they had signs that said, "Hey,
He's
just
dead.
so you know, Lou's dead." But we couldn't get him off the ballot in time, and he still won.
I mean, it just shows you the cynicism of voters, and you can understand, like, they would vote Trump in just to, like, stick it to the ruling class. So I
Well,
guess
it also
that's
goes back to our founding fathers' concern of being not informed.
Yeah. So, any final comments, Richie, on Electoral College and elections before we adjourn?
I wasn't a fan of the Electoral College originally because I applied there after high school. I didn't get in. I did not get in.
Well, if you didn't get in, I couldn't get in.
You were never, you couldn't even apply. So, no, hey, great show on a very boring, sleepy topic.
Where do you come down? Where do you come down? Because
we need it. We need the Electoral College, and it's
leave it as it is.
2-party state.
Okay, so I think I'm with you that time. You help me solidify my thoughts around it. All right, folks, make sure you listen next show. Richie's been wanting to do this. We're going to talk about the seemingly, or maybe not seemingly, angry population of the U.S. We did a show last spring, I guess, on declining happiness, but this is a little different. We want to talk about how people just seem to be angrier and have increased vitriol. You like that?
Vitriol.
Towards our fellow man. We're very tribal. I know we did that in the group identity show, but we're going to expand on the angry populace. Richie, what do you think about that next show?
It's a great topic because everywhere you go, there's road rage. There's people shouting at each other in line. There's people getting in fights on airplanes. You can't even look at somebody without them getting offended. We're just a very easily offended, very sensitive, angry, quick-to-temper nation, and I've been wondering why.
I want to get your thoughts on what do you think the origin of that is and the genesis of it, and where is it all bottling up from? I like to look back and why. I want to understand why things are happening. So we'll certainly cite a lot of examples of the anger, but we're going to try to put our psychology hats on and tell you where it's all coming from. But as always, please remember, if what you see or hear sounds idiotic, then we're just the guys to help you sort it out. See y'all next episode. Take care.
Thank you for listening. Please download, subscribe, share, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and also our website.